Good evening to everyone, my dear brothers and sisters. Uh, Mrs. Lakshmi has been extremely generous to say a few things about me. Uh, I am really happy to participate in this webinar organized by her. Uh, the reason is uh, that this session organized by them has tremendous enthusiasm among the legal practitioners. I saw various programs organized by them so far and which they are going to do in future. I'm really impressed. They don't go by names and they go by the subject. That's very important. The next webinars are going to be done by district judges and also the original side practicing lawyers in civil law, for example, Evidence Act, Constitution, and also CPC, CRPC. They are eminently fit persons to share their knowledge with us because we appellate lawyers may not be very thorough on that nitty gritty. In fact, though Lakshmi said I had 40 years of experience, 20 years I have been only in the labor courts. Then only I switched over to High Court. Therefore, it is with pleasure I participate. Before I go to the subject, since 23rd March till date, I left home only once, that too to visit my senior. Uh, to begin with, I thought probably it will be over within 2 weeks. Then I thought, okay, we skipped our entire April, we can make good by May. Somewhere in May, I thought it will be over. From June, we will start working with enthusiasm. June has gone. Now it looks July is washed out. From tomorrow onwards, we are going to have full court sittings on virtual court formula. Let us see how it. But I must confess that these 3 months have been most productive months in my learning process. I didn't relax even a minute during this period. I was happy to share with you that so many webinars have been conducted every day, morning, afternoon, evening. Sometimes there is a clash, but fortunately, we will get it done in YouTube later on. And these 3 months I used to do my next project on industrial law, which I have finished my part. My associates Yamini and Bashir are carrying on with their work, how to assemble all the laws, etc. It's a very Herculean task. So I've been concentrating on that, and it kept me going. And during the course of preparation of this subject, which I am practicing for 40 years, I must confess that I have not learned much, even in labor law. When I go in search of judgments one after another, it stunned me how little I have known in labor law. And I was really feeling embarrassed that I was totally ignorant on various branches of law, which I learned by listening to various senior advocates, judges, and resource persons. So it has been a tremendous 3 months learning. I have never learned so much in this short period of 3 months. Uh, in this entire July, probably we should be more aggressive. Resource persons like Lashmi should have a everyday webinar, and I'll be too happy to participate. If not live, I'm sure she will put it on YouTube. Even during my morning walk and evening walk, I listen to various webinars on Evidence Act, CPC, CRPC, various subjects. Apart from law, other subjects, speeches by eminent persons. It's been tremendous. I'm sure all of you are in that wavelength. Okay, now coming to the subject, I am as Lakshmi said, I am a management lawyer. But this next nearly 1 hour and 40 minutes or whatever it is, I will not speak to you or interact with you uh, as a management lawyer. No. My role is now what I am looking at, I'm aiming at is that during the course of next hour and 30 or 40 minutes, I am looking at participants who do not know much on this subject, or they know somewhat in the subject, and some probably advocates who are also well versed in the subject. Maybe a mix like that. But I am programmed only for the first two category of listeners who do not know much of labor law or who are in the practicing here and there, etc. It's not for the thorough professionals who are very much already practicing a lot with me. For them, it may not be of much resource. They should be well contented with the copies which I have given to them. It will be useful to them to take it in one stroke. So this is my brief. I'll proceed on the footing that I will give you two topics. First is what is a practice in labor laws, only in respect of Industrial Disputes Act. Uh, uh, how the practice takes place, how the litigation goes on before the labor court. And the second one is slightly different. What are the principles involved in labor law? I can assure you, by going through these 63 judgments, you will definitely get an in-depth knowledge on the subject. That much I can assure you. You can be confident in conducting your case. That much assurance I can give you on the next 1 hour and 45 minutes. Now, if you are going to practice in labor law or already started the practice, you must have two books with you in respect of industrial disputes. This is the Industrial Disputes Act. Why I'm showing this book specifically is this is by Madras Book Agency. By this book alone, though there are many other books publishers on that, you buy this. It's known for its accuracy and quality, and it consists of Tamil Nadu rules and notification. That's the only reason. The second one is whoever wants to practice in industrial courts must buy this book. This is the Bible. This Industrial Disputes Act by O.P. Malhotra. This is the fourth edition I am buying all these years. My purchase of this book at the beginning is very hilarious. I wanted to buy this book, but I didn't have the money. So I went to Sitaraman Company. More than once I was looking at it. The staff, or he is one of the partners, came to me and said, "Are you interested?" I said, "Very much interested, but I don't have money." Seeing my enthusiasm, he gave the book to me. He said, "Sir, you pay it whenever you like." That's how I bought this first volume. It's very interesting, and I have read it quite a few times. Without Malhotra, you just cannot practice. All the judgments you will get in it, no doubt about it. Now I'll straight away go to the subject. I have given all the notes. I'll go in that order only, don't worry. See, I have briefly given a history of the Industrial Disputes Act. To start with, in 1920s, it was called as a trade dispute, dealing with the dispute between the parties. It didn't have much of a flush, was not much of a usefulness. In 1938, a significant amendment took place by which the conciliation machinery was added to the act, because that is the purpose of this act. To see the object of the act, it is for the settlement of the disputes. The litigation is not the prime purpose of this act. That the 1947 Industrial Dispute Act is the one which we are now practicing. This act basically lays down the rights and liabilities of the employer as well as the employee, and also the procedure involved in it, how to settle the dispute between the parties, how a conflict take place, how the conflict should be processed, how the conflict can be resolved by a settlement. If it is not resolved by a settlement, how to go about the adjudication. These are the four pillars of this entire enactment. You can say this is the mother of all labor enactment. It consists of about 40 sections alone. But the development on law is tremendous as far as this subject is right from 1950 onwards till last month. The growth is tremendous. It keeps changing with the time. Being the title itself as an Industrial Disputes Act, it comes within the ambit of labor legislation, which is about 50. All the 11 enactments, it can be said in one sentence, one word, as a social welfare legislation. No doubt about it. That is the object of this act, and we must simply accept it. You cannot say it is pro-labor or anti-management, etc., etc. When there are unequals, definitely the law is to support the downtrodden or a weaker section, which is the working force. So that you must be conscious of it, and then on that basis only you should proceed with the practice in this law. You cannot be overly ambitious on that. Now there is a constitutional impact on these labor enactments. As you know, Article 246 enables lawmaking process. The seventh schedule deals with the legislation by the central government as well as the state government. List 3 is what we are concerned as a concurrent list. So labor is in the concurrent list, central list, state list, and concurrent list. Item 22 to 24 deals with labor legislation. That's why you will find labor legislation both by central government as well as by the state government, operating in different fields and also in the same field of amendments by the state government as well as by the central government. In parallel, it's going on. This is a brief background about this. Now, certain constitutional provisions also have an impact on labor law. Article 22 is nothing but double jeopardy, which is also applicable in labor enactments or labor practice concerning the workman. Then Article 42, just and human conditions for work and maternity relief. So there is a separate enactment for that. It is also a part of a constitutional right. Then Article 43 is living wages. See, as you all know, there are 3 types of wages: minimum wages, fair wages, and living wages. Minimum wages is to just keep the body and soul together, which is notified by the government periodically. In fact, Supreme Court says even this criteria for minimum wages is much below the necessity to keep the body and the soul together. In fact, some people dub it as a starvation wages, not minimum wages. So if you are given a minimum wage, you aspire for a fair wage. Fair wage is something more than body and soul together, some frugal comforts. Next is living wage. That is the goal, vision of a working class. Except that minimum wages are notified by the government in monetary terms, fair wages and living wages cannot be said with precision, because what is fair wages 5 years ago is no longer fair wage today. Therefore, it keeps changing. I can say roughly about 10% of the industrial population may be in the living wage. Otherwise, about in today's context, about 50 to 50% or more is on the minimum wage. Roughly about 40% is on fair wage. That itself is a good sign. Uh, then after some time, this fair wage will struggle between minimum wage and fair wage, and then it has to move ahead. So living wages is only in certain class of employees. For example, I can say banking sector, LIC, or top niche companies like Hindustan Lever or probably Ford and Hyundai, where the workmen are getting very good salary. They are in the living wage category. Then Article 51, capital A, uh, J speaks about that part is on fundamental rights. Just like you have fundamental rights, here it is fundamental duties. Sorry, fundamental duties. Strive towards collection excellence in all spheres of individual and collective activity, so that the nation constantly rises to higher levels of endeavor and achievements. This article has been used in at least 2 or 3 Supreme Court judgments while putting down excessive labor activity leading to violence, etc. They quoted this article and said the workmen should behave themselves. They have a duty to perform. This is the background of how this labor enactment came into force and how the constitutional impact is there, etc. Now, all of you should know certain aspects of pre-litigation stage. It is better you know it, because as you all know, one cannot come to the labor court directly. Even today, at least in Tamil Nadu, every workman should approach the conciliation machinery. There is a rationale for that. Not that they do not want the labor to come to court straight away. They do not want them to be sucked into litigation process. That's why it is so. They want to give a fair chance for conciliation and settlement. That is why you cannot come to the labor court straight away. Even today, in non-employment cases, yes, you can file an application against your termination, wait for 45 days, and then come to the labor court. It's as simple as that, but you must give a chance for conciliation. As far as the other issues which we'll deal with in shortly, you have to go for conciliation, and government has got a discretion to allow you to go to court or not. That's a fundamental issue. Now, before a matter comes to the court, it should be raised as an industrial dispute, first of all. How to raise an industrial dispute, you do not find it in the enactment. It is only a judgment made law. That is a union which commands membership from a substantial number of workmen, need not be even majority. It can raise an industrial dispute in a general body meeting held for that purpose. And they should authorize the trade union leaders to raise a dispute on their behalf on various issues like wage increase, leave, salary, food and other benefits, etc. And once a dispute is raised, I'm going theoretically at a situation where there is no controversy. So the union tells the management, these are all our needs. Kindly negotiate with me. Then the union and the management negotiate, union leaders negotiate, and management officers negotiate, and they arrive at a settlement. And theoretically, that the settlement should be placed before the general body meeting. They should approve it, then only a signature takes place. Otherwise, it will go to rough weather. Once the settlement is signed between the union office bearers and the management for a particular period, normally in Tamil Nadu it is 3 years, it's slowly moving towards 4 years. It is binding on all the workmen. Why it is binding on all the workmen? Because the management cannot negotiate with individual workmen in respect of his grievances. So it is the union which takes up the cause. And there is a sanctity for this settlement. No one can wriggle out of the settlement during the operation of the settlement, 3 years or whatever it is. The importance of that is I'm referring to KCP judgment. In a very controversial issue, I'm referring it to show how the law looks into the settlement under the Industrial Disputes Act. Now, during 90s, predominantly, no settlement would be signed without a strike or a lockout. There will be always industrial strife. Those were the days it was not known. So in KCP also there was a strike on that ground, which led to indiscipline according to the management, termination, lockout, etc., etc. All these matters go before the conciliation officer. Conciliation officer holds talks, and the settlement is arrived at on economic demands. But what to do about these employees? Were about 21 employees were terminated. So that the both parties say we will deal with it separately. So that settlement is over. Next, this non-employment of these workmen is taken up. The union, represented by a very reputed trade union leader, he agrees and enters into a settlement with the management saying two matters. The dismissed workman will be reinstated in service but without back wages. The option is given to the employee, but no back wages. The second is if the employee is not interested to report for work without back wages, etc., he can take compensation rupees X. This is what is agreed. Now, except 7 workmen, all others agree either they taken compensation or reported for work. These group of workmen say, no, we are not satisfied with this. We want reinstatement with full back wages, which can be done only when adjudication takes place. Therefore, they disown the settlement and move the labor court on a dispute raised by them. The Mavan's plea is, how can there be an industrial dispute when the settlement takes place? The settlement puts an end to industrial dispute. These workmen take a stand saying it is my individual right. How can the union sell it for A or B? Therefore, I'll proceed with it. The labor court accepted their view, single judge accepted the view, and the division bench also accepted their view. Ultimately, the Supreme Court put an end to that, saying there is no question of individual right when a settlement has been signed by the union in which you are a member. So there is no individual likes and dislikes. It's a package. So you must take it. And they also held that by the time the period of option is also over, therefore they gave a leverage to the workman saying, even now you can approach the management to take A or B, and it is up to you to take it and close the matter. Therefore, they uphold the sanctity of the settlement. So this is the sanctity of a settlement entered into between the union and management. It cannot be thwarted at all. This is a situation before the matter goes to the court. So this is a situation where it ends in conciliation, which is the bedrock of the industrial adjudication. The process before the conciliation, or because we lawyers, we don't normally participate in it, I just want to keep informed that normally a conciliation takes place. Parties arrive at a settlement, and that settlement is called 12 within bracket 3 of the Industrial Disputes Act. The significance of this settlement with reference to the earlier settlement which I said in 1996 is that is a bilateral settlement. This is a tripartite settlement. The significance of tripartite settlement is it is binding on all the workmen, whether he is a member of the union or not. I'll explain it immediately. Let us assume in a unit there are 1,000 workmen. 700 are members of a union, 300 are members of another union. Once a settlement is signed before the conciliation officer between management and A union in his presence, it's binding on automatically the B union also. Or the 300 workmen are not members of any union, but still it is binding on him. You may wonder how a settlement can be compelled on certain people who are not agreed. That's again the bedrock of the industrial jurisprudence, that settlement should always prevail. Now, how it can be binding on third parties who are not agreeing for it? The law recognizes that a settlement signed before the conciliation office, it is very important, settlement during conciliation of proceedings, is presumed to be fair and reasonable. That's the most important point. When the conciliation takes place in his presence, and the conciliation officer accepts this to be a fair settlement, it is binding on all. In fact, the law has gone to the extent of saying a settlement signed under 12.3 of the ID Act is equivalent to an award of a labor court, and therefore it cannot be shaken at all. But only one exception could be the parties who are not happy with it cannot challenge the validity of the settlement, but they can challenge it on the ground there is a malafide, no application of mind, they were not given opportunity, etc., for which they have to raise an industrial dispute. So normally 12.3 settlements are not disturbed. Okay, let's go to the next stage. A settlement does not take place bipartite and tripartite, then a failure report is given. That's where the court comes into. Only from there your practice will start, from Roman 6. So the adjudication takes place before two forums. One is before the labor court, another is before the industrial tribunal. The jurisdiction of the labor court is under a separate schedule. Jurisdiction of the tribunal is under a separate schedule. There are about 10 labor courts in Tamil Nadu. Chennai 3, then Kanjipuram, Vellore, Salem, Coimbatore, then this side Kadalur, Hosur, then Tirunelveli, Madurai, etc. Tribunal, there is only one tribunal for state government. There is a tribunal for central government in Shastri. This is basically jurisdiction. But the conciliation officers, which where I refer to the section 10, they also have some quasi-judicial functions. Whereas under section 33 of the ID Act, when we have to file an approval application before the conciliation officer, I deal with it a bit later, which is called as a quasi-judicial proceedings. There are also an adjudication take place. So these are the judicial forums: labor court, tribunal, state, central, and also the conciliation officers who act as a quasi-judicial authorities. Now the jurisdiction of the tribunal and is under section 11, how it processes the taking evidence, etc. Now the most important provision is section 11 capital A. Earlier to the introduction of this section in 1972, the labor court's power was only to adjudicate the employment, non-employment, etc., etc. In respect of non-employment cases alone. It had little leverage or power to interfere with the termination of the employees. The Supreme Court has said unless it is victimization or shockingly disproportionate punishment, or the findings of the inquiry officer is so perverse, the labor courts cannot sit in the judgment over the managerial decisions. But it was time to check that. So in 72, an amendment was brought by which section 11 capital A was introduced. And in Firestone case, the Supreme Court elaborately dealt with what is the change in legislation brought about under section 11 capital A of the ID Act. They fundamentally said two things. The labor court can differ from the findings of the inquiry officer, which it was not possible earlier to this provision. It can virtually act as an appellate court because this is necessary. Otherwise, the inquiries will be conducted in a one-sided manner and will be end of the matter. The courts will have little leverage to interfere with it. But not only that, that judgment said the labor court can interfere with the findings of the inquiry officer, not only on the findings and also the manner of conducting the inquiry, whether it is conducted in a fair and proper manner or not. Because as you all know, the charge sheet issue should be the amendment, the inquiry officer is appointed by the amendment, the findings officer, finding is given by the inquiry officer who is an officer of the company or a lawyer or a retired officer of the department, ex-judge, etc. are all appointed by the management. So there is always a tendency, always there is a fear, he is a management appointed person and what else he will do except to say workman is guilty. So this is a big check on the employer. If you do a stage managed inquiry, there is a judicial process for it. That there is a fear of judicial process itself is sufficient for the management to conduct the inquiry in a fair and proper manner is the important lesson, message. Therefore, the labor court can differ in the manner of conducting inquiry and also findings of the inquiry officer. And the third most important power recognized by that judgment is, which is obvious in the section itself, the management's decision on the punishment is not the end of it. In respect of dismissal, termination. So not in respect of minor punishment. That the inquiry would be conducted in a fair and proper manner, the findings will be valid. Still the punishment aspect, which was unchecked earlier, now is checked. The labor court can go into that and say whether the punishment is disproportionate to the proved misconduct or not. It's an important tool in the armory of the labor code. Because for petty misconduct, you cannot terminate an employee and get away with it. But what is the scale of the power under 11A, how it will be exercised is absolute discretion of the labor code. There is nothing to say these are the punishments which can be upheld or these are the punishments which can be interfered with. There's nothing. It all goes by the trend as it is. And not only the labor court can set aside the termination order, but it can also mold the relief by giving reinstatement with full back wages, etc. by giving reinstatement without back wages, 50% back wages, etc. By giving only compensation and no reinstatement. It can mold the relief in any manner it likes. And the orders of the labor court, there is no appeal under the act. Earlier it was so, now there is no appeal. Only a writ jurisdiction is available. The grounds on which the writ jurisdiction can be exercised is very limited, as you all know. Unless there is a perversity or error of law on the face of it, the 226 cannot be invoked. Therefore, virtually the labor court's ruling normally come to an end without being disturbed by the High Court, unless there are sufficient grounds. Now, the next section is called 11 capital B, which was recently introduced. Earlier, once the award is passed, enforcing it was a tough job. What is enforcing is by prosecuting the amendment under section 29 of the Act, or claiming the money value of it, which I'll deal with a bit later, under section 33C2 of the Act, which is called as an executive proceedings. But now the section 11B has been introduced. An award can be executed by the very same labor court under section 11 capital B. It can call for the amendment to implement the award, failing which it can give monetary relief or arrest or attachment of property, just like a civil court. So this is a very important legislation to strengthen the credibility of the labor court without driving the workman to other forum to implement the award. It's very important provision. Now, this is the basic functioning of the labor courts and tribunals which are dealt with. Now, let us see what are the cases the labor courts can deal with it. Once I go through this, then I'll crystallize it immediately thereafter. Now, this important section is called 2 capital A. 2 capital A was not in the Act in 1947. It was introduced only in the year 1965. Earlier, a non-employment of individual workmen should also be raised only by a union, and it should be taken to the government, and government may refer or may not refer. The union may take up or may not take up at all. So individual workman has to be at the mercy of the trade union and the government for his adjudication before the labor court. The legislature felt it was too harsh, and therefore they introduced section 2 capital A, by which individual can straight away take up his non-employment and go to the conciliation officer and get his non-employment referred by the labor court earlier. Now, a lot of amendments have been made. He can go to the labor court straight away. But who can go to the labor court? There are two important ingredients, the 2A or whatever it is. Only a workman can go to the labor court. As you all know, it is very simple. Only a workman can go. But we have to see the definition of workman. Under section 2S, which says workman is a person who is engaged, employed in to do skilled, unskilled, technical, operational, etc., etc. Then they subsequently in 56, etc., amendment was brought in where supervisors drawing salary up to a particular limit were excluded, administrative persons were excluded, managerial persons were excluded. Now, right from 1956 onwards, the controversy was going on. Who is a workman? How to lay down the principles or formula or ingredients of a workman, etc., etc. One line of thinking was, if he comes within the inclusion part of it, that is doing technical, skilled, unskilled, technical, operational, etc., clerical, he is a workman. Another view was no, not necessary. If he is not a supervisor drawing salary of X, or is not an administrative officer, or is not a managerial person, he is deemed to be a workman. There were three judges bench here and there, and ultimately the Constitution bench in Sandoz case decided the law which laid down by earlier judgments in May and Becker, etc., which said that a person to come within the scope of the definition of workman should be performing duties of a workman is the criteria. Only if he satisfies that he was doing technical, skilled, unskilled, operational, clerical work, he is a workman. Only if he discharges that, then the amendment has to discharge that burden that no, he was doing operational and managerial functions, administrative functions, and supervisory functions. That is the judgment which laid down the finality to that controversy. Now, definition of industry is next very important thing. I request all of you to read this judgment of 1978 2 SEC 2 and 3. This judgment is given by Justice Krishna Iyer, who is the Everest of Indian labor jurisprudence, undoubtedly. He has made very many landmark judgments. Bangalore water supply is one among them. Just like the case of Workman, what is in industry was more complex. At least judgments were given by 3 judges consisting of even Chief Justice of India, because they all went on a conservative view. Industry means manufacturing activity should take place with materials, men, tools, etc. etc. So they excluded hospitals, cooperative societies, research institutions, charitable institutions, education institutions, and liberal profession from the definition of industry. That was how even the jurists like Gajendra Katkar held, even the eminent jurist Hidayatullah held, etc. Now, in 1978, 76 or so, Supreme Court Constitution Bench, 7 judges takes up for consideration this vexed question. And who other than Krishna Iyer would be an eminent person to decide this case? This judgment runs to 165 paragraphs written by Krishna Iyer. 164 exactly, 165 they conclude. At para 162, he gives the conclusion. And at 164, he explains his dismay why the 1946 Act, which defined the industry, did not keep pace with the changing times. Why the old thought process continued in this country, even by Supreme Court judgments, and why the legislature also didn't wake up to the realities and amend the definition of industry. These 162 paragraphs is a treatise. It is all the 164 paragraphs are all original thinking. There is a reference to only one judgment which he relies on, which he improves ultimately, is the judgment written by Justice Mukherjee of Supreme Court in City Nagpur case, on which he improves very much. All the other judgments is referred is only the purpose of distinguishing it and overruling it. There is no cut and paste in this judgment. It's a remarkable piece of judgment. You can read it any number of times for the sheer knowledge, original thinking by Justice Krishna. It is one of the classical judgments, but the story does not end there. As he said in this paragraph 164, why the law did not keep pace with the social needs. This judgment holds the field even today. In 1982, overhauling took place in labor legislation, where a lot of amendments were made, a lot of sections were brought in, etc., including the definition of industry. So he has given the judgment in 78. In 82, the industry definition is amended, virtually accepting Krishna Iyer's judgment. The core of Krishna Iyer's judgment is what is an industry is to be decided by triple test. That is, employer-employer relationship to satisfy human needs and wants with materials. That is sufficiency. So if the triple test is satisfied, it is an industry. So systematic activity, employer-employer relationship to satisfy human needs and wants. So if there it is industry. So this test was virtually borrowed by this amendment by the parliament, and it was also brought in by an amendment. But when all other sections have been notified and implemented, only this section has not been notified till date. Now the correctness of this judgment is pending before reference to a larger bench of 9 judges. We do not know when the 9 judges will take up the case. So what Krishna Iyer exclaimed in para 164 is the position now also. The simple reason why this is not notified is, even if the objects of the amendment shows, while they hold everything is an industry, but for the very same institutions where Krishna held to be an industry, like hospitals, cooperative society, research organization, charitable institutions, education institutions, they wanted to bring another law for the institution. That is why it is kept pending, because for them no other enactment has been brought into force. So this judgment still holds the tree, but it settles the controversy till date. Many of the Supreme Court judgments rendered by Krishna, Bangalore Water Board, LIC, Gujarat Steel, which I will refer later on, Sundaramani, etc., all stood the test of time because of the sheer brilliance and originality and the thought of Justice Krishna, who made his imprint in industry jurisprudence once and for all. Now, if non-employment is the only issue under the section 2A, what is in respect of issues apart from 2A? So in 2A, only non-employment, dismissal, termination, etc. In fact, retrenchment is also a law laid down by Supreme Justice Krishna in Sundaramani versus State Bank of India, where the earlier view was only a surplus wage retrenchment, but he said any reason whatsoever is the terminology used. So if a termination takes place for any reason whatsoever, that is retrenchment. So this is how a section 2A operates. Now section 2K, section 2K deals with larger issues, which is something like, which I have said, layoff, lockout, strike, closure, demand increase in wages and other benefits, demand for bonus beyond 8.33, justification of transfer order, then in respect of change in service conditions, which is existent, but you want to change it. So these are the various disputes which can be dealt with in section 2K, which is called as what we call in normal parlance a general demand or a TK dispute, which is raised only by the union and individuals are not parties to it. No, it is raised on behalf of the individuals. But here, only the union can raise a dispute with the authority of the workman, and it will be adjudicated before a labor court or tribunal. So in that, I want to deal with only three important principles. What is layoff? Layoff, as you all know, we read in newspaper nowadays, the workmen are laid off in IT company, etc., where it means non-employment really, it's a termination. That's what it means. But here, the layoff is not so. Where due to economic reasons or its inability, the management is unable to give work to the workman, it lays off the workman. They are still in service, but work is not given to them. But layoff is given as defined under section 2 triple K, compensation under section 2C, and permission is under 25M. But layoff permission power can be granted only in terms of the standing orders. This Khair Bata judgment you can read to know what is the ingredients of layoff. In that case, actually the workmen were denied work because of certain unrest in the estate. But the workmen filed a case saying we have been illegally laid off. Then the Supreme Court deals with the distinction, what is meant by layoff and what is lockout, and deals with it. That is why next one is lockout. Lockout is a antithesis of strike. If the workman can go on a strike, withdrawing the labor, the management can say you need not report for work. The management can withdraw its premises to workmen not to report for work. So it is an antithesis of strike. This is a power given to the management to deny work to the workman on certain grounds, but it can be always tested in a court of law, correct or not. That's why it's all 2K dispute. Next one is very important, strike. You all know what is in the strike. We have a general idea about strike, but in industrial law, it's complicated. What is strike? It is defined, and what is illegal strike? What is legal strike? What is justified strike, etc. Right from 70 onwards, this law developed. The controversy was, it all understood if there is a strike, the workmen will not earn their wages on the principle of no work, no pay. But a twist was given, but if the strike is legal and justified, they were pushed to go on a strike, are they entitled for wages or not? This was settled by the Supreme Court in the 1994 Syndicate Bank case. Yes, the strike is legal and also justified, then they will be entitled for wages. If either of them is not present, no, they will not be entitled for wages. So if the strike is illegal no wages. But justified, no wages. Strike is justified but illegal, again no wages. So both ingredients are necessary to claim wages. Otherwise, it is a case of no work, no pay. It is strike is illegal. The consequences of illegal strike provided under the Act and also disciplinary action is possible. Next judgment is this SLY Auto Tech Private Limited. This I given only so the simple reason. In that judgment, the learned judge feels, if you read the judgment, you'll find in three paragraphs 20 onwards, this labor law is an archaic and is outdated law. The learned judge also says it's time to revamp the law. Otherwise, this type of industrial strife will be frequent and it will not be interest of both the management and the working class. So this is a judgment which shows sufficient light on the right of the workman to go on a strike and what is the limit and what are the restrictions. It's a brilliant judgment on that aspect, which has dealt with various Supreme Court judgments where they held right to strike is there, but it is not absolute. There is a Lakshman Rekha for everything. So that judgment deals with it. The next issue is closure. Closure, as you all know, it's a closing down the place of business once and for all. And there is little the employees can do on the closure except to allege and prove that it is a pretense and not a genuine closure. I close it, my son runs it, or my benami runs it. Only then it can be said to be a benami closure and not a closure in the eye of law. Otherwise, the reasons for the closure are immaterial. Whether the closure is genuine or not is only material. Then demands on increase in wages and other benefits is a big subject. Uh, these are all issues concerned with the discretion of the industrial tribunals, but there are any number of judgments on that. Fundamental principle is a demand can be raised and can be adjudicated on the ground of financial capacity of the employer and also the wage pattern prevailing in the industry and also the region come industry and financial position. This is a very big subject on its own. I just want to keep informed. This is another type of dispute. Then the Bonus Act 1965 is a self-contained code. Minimum bonus is 8.33, maximum bonus is 20% of the earned wages of an employee on a period of calendar year. But minimum has to be given. But beyond the minimum, if the workman want, they have to raise an industrial dispute. And how this minimum bonus can increase up to 20%, the calculation is strictly provided on the Bonus Act and the schedule contained therein. They have to adjudicate on that. Then the question of transfer. The labor court can go into the question of validity of the transfer. It is again, as you all know, the transfer can be set aside only if there is mala fides or there is no power at all. The administrative reasons for the management to transfer is hardly suited for the courts to interfere. It's the general law. Then change of service conditions. For example, Sunday is a weekly holiday. We want to change it to Friday, or the working hours are 6 hours. I want it to increase it to 8 hours. I want to increase the shift, change the shift. All which is in vogue for quite some time cannot be changed unilaterally by the management, but they have to give a notice and it can be adjudicated or settled. This is the functions of the 2K dispute. Then if non-employment is one dispute, general issues is another dispute. These are the two disputes that are covered. Now we have to see how the awards of the labor courts are granted. The award is under section 2B and the award should be publication in a gazette in respect of 2K disputes alone, not in 2A disputes. 30 days after its publication in the gazette only the award becomes operational or you can implement it. Now there was a hitch. The government may not publish the award in the gazette at all. Technically, there was a section which provided for it. But the Madras High Court in 2014 judgment, which I referred to, they held that section is unconstitutional because a judicial process cannot be set at naught by an administrative action. That is a very interesting judgment. You can go to it. Now, there is another section called as Section 33. This is an important protection to the workman when a dispute is pending before conciliation officer. As I said earlier, there are a number of disputes on charter demands, bonus, service condition, etc. It is likely that the management would victimize the frontline union leaders or the office bearers of the trade union. So section 33 gives a protection to them. It says if the dispute is connected with the disciplinary proceedings, then permission should be taken for dismissing an employee. But if the dispute and non-employment is entirely different, you can dismiss, but you must take approval for it, a post-sanction, etc. Third is the workman or protected workman. There is another section which deals with the protected workman status. They cannot be dismissed without the permission of the conciliation officer or the court. So dispute and the misconduct is one and the same, permission. Protected workman means permission. The misconduct is one thing and the dispute is different. Dismissal can be done, but approach should be granted. For example, take a case of transfer. I am transferred. On the transfer, the union raises a dispute. On the very same disobedience of the transfer, there cannot be a dismissal without the permission of the authority, because dispute and the misconduct are one and the same. Let's take another case. There is a transfer in dispute in respect of a workman, but another workman commits a different misconduct. Therefore, the dispute and misconduct are different. He is dismissed for absence. There is no question of permission. You can dismiss him, but approval should be granted, taken. Similarly, during the pendency of this case, this dispute, the service conditions of the workman should not be unilaterally changed. So these are all protection to see that when a dispute is raised, the management does not victimize the working class in general, or the trade union leaders or front leaders or union office bearers for raising an industrial dispute. This is a check on the amendment, is the judicial aspect of it. But now the important point is, up to 2002, it was felt only in respect of permission, it is mandatory. Because unless you take a permission, the dismissal order does not take effect at all. But as far as the approval is concerned, we dismiss him and go for an approval. Therefore, the law till then was, while the first two categories are mandatory, the second one was only directory, not mandatory. But Supreme Court in 2002 in Jaipur gave a famous judgment, constitution bench judgment, which was good. He said an employer who violates law cannot go scot-free. They almost placed 33, 1, 3 and 2 on equal position. They said if you want to dismiss even a workman whose dispute is unconnected with the demand, still you must take an approval. If you don't take approval, the Supreme Court used the famous word, it's an unborn child. Therefore, they said if an approval application is not taken, there is no dismissal in the eye of law and it is non-est. Therefore, this is a far-reaching and important judgment in favor of the workman, or it has set the law correctly. But there are some criticism on this judgment. But as long as it's a constitution bench, we cannot do anything about it. But there are certain legal developments against this judgment. Some leverages have been brought out. It's an entirely different matter. But for the present, you know that Jaipur Jilla is the law of the land. Now, when I said we must take an approval application after dismissing a workman, what is the scope of that litigation? That alone I want to keep in, because a non-employment 2-year dispute, we have said 11A is operational, fairness of the inquiry, findings of the inquiry officer, then proportionality of the punishment, etc. But here also in the section 33, we dismiss a workman and go for approval. That's also a judicial process, either before the conciliation officer or before the court. But is it on same footing? The Cholan Roadway says it's no. Or it simply says a prima facie finding is sufficient. It cannot be a full-fledged trial. No doubt, it can go into the fairness of the inquiry and also the findings. But it cannot enter the realm of the proportionality of the punishment. Or which really, to put it very positively, whether the prima facie case is made out, there is no victimization, standing order is followed, then 1 month notice is given. If it is done, it is approval should be normally given. If approval is given, that's not the end of the matter. The workman can again raise a dispute. Challenging is non-employment in full-fledged form. But if approval is not granted by the tribunal, on the ground even prima facie case is not proved, or it is an element of victimization or certain legal grounds, again As said in Jaipur Jilla case, there is no termination in the eye of law. He is deemed to be in employment, is entailed for the benefits. This is another non-employment litigation in a small way. Now, this section 33 capital A, I want to keep you informed historically. If there is a violation of 33, workman can approach the same court alleging violation of 33 and convert that complaint into an industrial dispute and adjudicate the scale, because approval is not taken. It is deemed to be an industrial dispute in itself. But after Jaipur Jilla, this section is not at all invoked because it is not at all necessary. Okay. Next is another provision called 33C2. That's another important provision. I said individuals' non-employment and general demands on the working class as a whole, and also a provision called 33, which is with judicial proceedings in a limited way. Fourth line of litigation is 33C2. The workman is entitled only for money, not his non-employment or demands, etc., etc. But he wants certain money to be paid. For example, even 8.33 bonus is not paid. His salary is not paid. His increment is not paid, where the entitlement is already there, but it is not paid, or less amount is paid. What should he do? Should he raise a dispute? No. There is a provision called 33C2, where he can file a petition before the labor court. Says this is my entitlement. This is the amount. It is a speedy remedy. It is a simple remedy. It is no court fee for it, even if you claim huge money, etc. For example, in a case of non-employment, reinstatement with back wages is given. You can file a 33C2 petition on back wages. But what's the quantum can be a dispute. But the Supreme Court has clarified it is an incidental issue which can be gone into by the labor court in its jurisdiction. But the Supreme Court has cautioned in the 2006, even earlier judgments, it is crystallized in it is well a coin. That's why I refer to the judgment. The Supreme Court says your claim can even be justified, but if it is not entitled for, this jurisdiction cannot be invoked. Virtually, they are saying you cannot raise a fresh demand. You cannot make a fresh claim. I ought to have been promoted. If I promoted, I would have got this money. I am working in group B, but I should have been promoted in group C. The difference in wages should be given, etc. cannot be given. But even in group B, you are working, but you are paid lesser. Then you can claim this money. This is the, or virtually saying there should be an entitlement. Should be a money due. There should be a crystallized right. For example, 8.33 bonus. It is not given, you can make a claim. How much is an issue? It can be gone into by the labor court. Then section 36, I just want to show that only legal practitioners can practice only with the leave of the court and also without any objection from the other side. Section 29 is about the penalties if you don't implement the award of the labor court. The proceedings before the cushion authorities also there. What is called as chapter 5 capital B, where if your management having 100 or more workmen on an average working day preceding 12 calendar months, it can lay off, retrench and close only with the permission of the quasi-judicial authorities under the chapter. This is a minor proceedings. So before the labor court, normally there is a 2A dispute, there is a 2K dispute, there is a 33 application, 33C2 application, and also 33A, which is not much. And before the quasi-judicial authority, chapter 5B. These are generally the judicial proceedings before the labor court, which you should be having some idea. So this is the functioning of the labor court. These are the judicial proceedings. This is what I want to keep you informed as far as the practice before the labor court is concerned. Next, I'll take up for consideration, which will be slightly heavy, the principles. I know that in any branch of law, the march of law is very, very important. Mere sections are not decisive, though it may be apparent. More importantly, in labor law, it is a judgment-made law. The few sections under the Industrial Disputes Act, if you read it, by itself will not throw much light. Therefore, a person practicing in labor law must be a studious student of law. I don't say that in labor law alone, for any branch of law, I admit. But here it is a must. If you are not keeping pace with the judicial trends, you just cannot practice in labor law. It is a judgment-made law, and it keeps changing. That is the most challenging and interesting part of labor law. I can say very simply, it changes with the trend of the society, and also I can say it is a individual judge's view also. If Krishna says this for 75 to 82 or 83, in 2000 Singha and others said something different. So in that period, in abuse during earlier time was held to be not a misconduct, serious warranting dismissal. They said after all it's emotionally is a workman as it is cannot be found fault. But later on in 2000 you find even abuse dismissal is valid. Earlier this absence no dismissal, no dismissal. Theft of petty articles, no dismissal, no petty articles dismissal. So it keeps changing. So you must be a studious student of reading journals in labor law. Now I'll run through about 31 principles. Why I'm running through is because judgments are with you. You can go through it. The objects of the Industrial Disputes Act I have taken 1999. Why I am not referring to even earlier judgments of Krishna, etc. This judgment in para 9, it is so well crystallized by Justice Mukhopadhyay. It says it's a social piece of legislation. It's for the working class, and it should be read in such a manner it promotes the object of the act. That is why the objects of the act I have chosen that. The interpretation of labor law, as I said earlier, it keeps changing with the times. Just one second. In 78, Justice Krishna said in a KCP case, there is a doubt on fact and law, give the benefit to the workman. It's a famous expression in the judge's last paragraph you see. It's quite understandable. But in 2001, the Constitution bench in sale case said, even labor legislation does not mean you can go haywire. That's exactly what they said. You cannot run amok. In contract labor, the Constitution bench reversed. In principle, the judgments laid down by Krishna Iyer in very famous case, Hussain Bai case. They said if the contract is valid in the eye of law, unless the government prohibits or abolish, no court can interfere in that arrangement. No doubt they said if the sham contract, the judicial authority can go into it. But they put an end to this principle called social welfare legislation, etc. They said it cannot be doing violence to the language. And they said the Contract Labor Act is concerned, it should rest content with the sections made therein because it is self-contained. Again, in Gordon Woodruff, when the workman questioned the closure, and the labor court granted, apart from closure compensation, additional benefits, compensation, the Supreme Court says, how can it be given in the name of social welfare legislation? The closure means the closure compensation, end of it, there is no further payment in it. That's how it put an end to it. But in 2010, 2LLJ shift has taken place. Justice Ganguly and Singhvi, etc. have said, put back the clock to 1978, because in between they said liberalization, laissez-faire, the economy is opened up, therefore the law should also change, etc. They said, as far as labor law is concerned, it still holds good. It's a social welfare legislation. And they said social welfare legislation will be the touchstone of labor law. And therefore the liberal interpretation given in favor of the amendment should be put an end to this next judgment. This is to know, it is interesting to know how the swing takes place. Now next three judgments on res judicata, then constructive res judicata, accord and satisfaction, approbation and reprobation. Though the labor jurisprudence by itself is not bound by the strict rules of Evidence Act or Civil Procedure Code, they repeatedly held the principles laid down will apply to judicial proceedings, which includes labor law. Therefore, res judicata obviously has to be applied. Therefore, otherwise there will be no end to the litigation. They said even constructive res judicata we have to infer in it. Then approbation and reprobation, accord and satisfaction. In that case, a workman was terminated from service. The labor court granted relief of compensation. The workman said, "I am receiving it under protest, and still I am going to challenge it." Then the Supreme Court said, "There is no accord and satisfaction. It's an approbation, reprobation, and he can entail to challenge it." So those principles will apply. Then again, estoppel, waiver, acquiescence, doctrine of acceptance or salientio apply to labor laws. So these well-known principles are made applicable to labor laws also. Then next, the seventh is an interesting question. It is not the understanding of a party which decides the law. If you read this judgment, it will be very interesting. It's for a petty sum of 25 rupees, the matter has gone to Supreme Court. Even in 54, it was a petty amount. Because a prosecution was lost against this gentleman for not adhering to the provisions of the Factories Act, because he didn't maintain registers. He pleaded, "No, I am not a factory, I am only a shop," etc. Then the prosecution said, "You are maintaining all the registers, but you have violated certain provisions." He said, "That's how I understood." But now, in reality, it is not so. The Supreme Court upheld the conduct of the parties is not decisive, and what is law is a decisive. And if it is not a factory, that's the end of the matter. That you maintain certain records, therefore you committed violence is not the criteria. That's all the interesting point in that. The next one is if you accept a terminal benefits, because if you read the IDA Act, you will know if you want to terminate an employee who has rendered 240 days of service in 24 calendar months, he must be given his retirement compensation, notice pay, and he has put in 5 years of service. Apart from the provisions of the IDA Act, he is also entitled for gratuity. So those payments are given to an employee. He takes it under protest. He can still challenge it, or even he does not protest. It does not mean he has accepted his non-employment. Therefore, the Calcutta High Court clarified that merely accepting the terminal benefit does not mean accepting the termination itself. Therefore, he is entitled to challenge his non-employment is the important point. Next important point is labor court a court for the purpose of contempt proceedings? The first two division benches said no. In those cases, the workman got an award in their favor. The amendment goes to the High Court. For example, in Binny, they lose the case. It is confirmed by the division bench. Again, in Western Crompton, the labor court holds in favor of the workman. Single judge reverses, bench confirms it. But the amendment does not implement it by giving reinstatement, etc. So they filed contempt petition before the High Court. They said the amendment should be held up for contempt. The High Court clarified there is no violation of our order. We only confirm the labor court order. And the labor court is also not a court for contempt, and therefore there cannot be a contempt proceedings against the management. But the important shift is, which may not be in your notes, kindly note down, 2011, volume 6, CTC, current Tamil Nadu cases, 844. 2011, 6 SEC, CTC, 844, kindly note down. A. Sachidanandam versus so and so, so and so. This is a very interesting twist. Here, the workman got a relief in his favor. The amendment goes to the High Court, and the High Court confirms it, and not merely confirms it. It says you must implement the award. A positive direction is given. You must implement it within so and so by paying compensation, etc. It is not complied with. Now the workman file a petition for contempt, including claim for monetary relief, arrest, attachment of properties, everything. Now the division bench says, yes, it is a contempt of our order where we gave a positive direction to the amendment to pay all these things. Therefore, it is not done. It will amount to contempt. they bring the property for auction, and also heavy fine is levied against the managing director. So this is a development in that field. Next judgment is Hotel Imperial. The labor court, though does not have a power to grant interim stay or interim injunction, it has got a power to grant interim relief. For example, when a demand is raised on increase in wages, it will linger for 3 or 4 years or even for a shorter period. But once a settlement is expired, they are entitled for some money. The man may say 100, they may demand 1,000. So when the matter goes to court, the workman plead, okay, let's get some interim relief, which cannot be a relief, which cannot be denied at all at any lowest point of amount. So the tribunal can grant an interim relief subject to the final relief. That interim relief cannot be almost a final relief, but we do not know. So it can grant an interim relief during the pendency of the dispute. So that limited power is available. Then the labor court has got a power to implead parties, which is not there in the order of reference by the government. For example, when the company name is A with particular owner, during the pendency of the dispute, the company changes hands genuinely, then a new party should be there brought in. Otherwise, it will be a dead proceedings. Just like bringing LRs on record in any other proceedings, a new party can be brought in during the pendency of the dispute, because the award ultimately will be implemented against the amendment and also their successor in interest subsequently also. Therefore, power to implead is also granted. That certain important principles, it is always said that the proceedings before the labor court is very informal proceedings. Though the rules are there, our claim petition should be drafted. These are also briefly it is done, not strictly in terms of the CPC. But the courts have laid down, even in labor court proceedings, the principles of uh, Evidence Act or CPC should be applicable. For example, precise nature of the plea must be necessary in a litigation filed by the workman or management. For example, if you say, I have been terminated from service in violation of provisions of the ID Act, no, you must say there is a violation in terms of the provisions of the ID Act, specifically section 25F. I have not been given notice pay, or I have not been given return compensation, or compensation is given less, which is mandatory in nature, etc. Or there is a violation of seniority list. So you have to raise that point. Or there is a violation of 25G. I have worked for more than 240 days, but they have not taken that into consideration. So violation of 25B or 25G or 25F or re-employment 25H. What is violated? You must narrate the fact and also the law. To that extent, they said the plea is necessary even before the labor court. Again, the 13th one is you cannot take evidence without a plea. You cannot say it's an informal proceedings, therefore, without pleading, I can lead evidence. This is also not permissible under the labor enactment. Just keep you informed on that. Then again, they say, after having said that, there is a relaxation. This also I want to point out. Strict rules of Evidence Act is not required. For example, in Sindhu Resettlement Corporation case, a case of simple termination of an employee. So the employee files his appointment order and also the termination order, and the management also does not lead evidence, workman also does not lead evidence. The labor court holds the termination on the face of it is not valid, therefore it grants relief. However, the High Court takes the plea, no, the workman has not gone to the box and proved this document that it is in violation of the provisions of the labor enactment, etc. The Supreme Court says, what is the necessary for it? If the document is not disputed, it's an admitted document. There is no necessity that you must get into the box and give evidence. Therefore, they said the rigor of Evidence Act, though the principles are necessary, the rigor of the Evidence Act, once the documentation is admitted one, it is not disputed, or if it is to be disputed, it is for the management to dispute it, saying it's not a letter given by us. And therefore, they said the strict rules of Evidence Act is not required, though the principles may apply to great extent. Then the labor court also, the parties can amend, modify the pleadings before about the proceedings come to an end. Section Rule 39 says in evidence, any evidence in any manner in any point of time. Also, amendment is also permitted. Additional written statement is also permitted. This is a case where after reserving orders, the case, the management filed an application to amend the petition counter statement or also further cross-examine the workman. It was denied by the labor court saying it is a dialectic tactics. The Madras High Court said not necessary. That the labor court should be interested to find out the truth. At any stage, it may be. Even before ever passing an award, it should allow the parties to lead evidence to find out the truth. That it is, if it is belated, you can impose some cost on it, you cannot deny it. That's the principle. Then the other important principle is discrimination cannot be allowed in labor jurisprudence. Discrimination is an important point on which a termination order of a workman can be set aside. It's a sound principle. It is good against the very nature of things. If two persons commit a misconduct, one cannot be given lesser punishment, and the other cannot be given a severe punishment. It's so fundamental. But there are also certain distinctions. If both of them are charge sheeted for a chain of event and one person apologizes, therefore he is taken back in employment. The other person does not apologize, contest the case. The charges are proved and is dismissed. He can contest the case only on the merits of the case. He cannot quote a plea of discrimination because both are not treated on equal terms. Because he has apologized, the management will show a leniency. That's an important point in respect of discrimination. Otherwise, the principles of discrimination applies. I'll show you a bit later, which you'll find immediately in Indian Oil case. A helper as well as a driver is involved in theft of oil materials. A helper is dismissed, but not the driver. But the transaction is one and the same. If the charge is not proved against the driver, it is not proved against the helper also. Therefore, they applied the principles of discrimination and said the helper should be reinstated in service. But on the question of punishment, there can be different yardsticks. In a chain of event, for example, violence, who is in the forefront, who is in the background, and who is shouting, but who is assaulting, who is striking, who is leading the strike, all make a difference. Therefore, it does not mean that in a group there is a lesser punishment to one section and there is a major punishment to another section. By per se does not imply discrimination, because they are not equals. Only equals cannot be treated differently. But if they are not equals, definitely they will not be treated in equals. These are the two judgments on that, where they said the misconduct differ in seriousness, then the punishment can be different. And also there is a different punishment based on the apology and also past record of service. Though the punishment may be, the chain of events may be same, that can be distinguished. It will not amount to discrimination. These are the different principles you have to apply on a case-to-case basis. Next is very important. In labor jurisprudence, as you all know, there are the two principles. One is called a dismissal, which is always a punishment for a misconduct and which is a stigma. Another is called, as you all know, even in service jurisdiction, discharge simpliciter. That is, there is no allegation of misconduct at all. But based on the provisions of the appointment order, a person can be terminated from service. Or because of his non-performance, he can be terminated from service. This is called as discharge simpliciter. But how to distinguish what is misconduct and what is discharge simpliciter? If it is not explicit. If it is explicit, there is no problem at all. But Supreme Court has laid down, the foundation is misconduct, then it is a punishment. But there is no foundation, it is only a motive, then it is not a misconduct. For example, take a simple case of probationer. Earlier, he would have been found with committing a misconduct for which a minor punishment can be given. But end of the probation period is terminated for unsatisfactory performance. That is discharge simpliciter. Because the foundation is only performance. That is suffered earlier punishment is not the foundation. That could be a motive. How can we confirm a person who has suffered a punishment? Can be a motive. But the caution is the termination order, if there is a reference to the earlier punishment, then the situation will be changed. So we should be very careful to know what is the foundation and what is the motive. But it's very complex situation. But if you read this judgment, it will be very clear to you. Then next one, there is also development in this law in probationer's case. Rajiv Gandhi, postgraduate medical institution, college, etc. They're all probation. But this is a fine distinction on the very crystal clear principle. That's why I refer to this. Next one is uh, uh, normally an employee can be terminated from service only in a misconduct proved in a domestic inquiry. It's well settled principle. But even in Firestone, they said if there is no scope to conduct an inquiry, you can dismiss him and prove it in a labor court. But the question arose in Ashok Leyland case in 18. When does the punishment order takes effect? So no inquiry but dismissal. But you prove it in a labor court. When does it take effect? Does the doctrine of relation back applies or not? Because the workman pleaded that only when the charge is proved, the dismissal order takes effect. Therefore, from the date of dismissal order till the court upholds is I am entitled for wages. The Madras bench clarified no such thing. A dismissal order is effective always on the date on which it is passed. That is proved subsequently is a different matter. Probably, if well advised, the workman could have filed a petition for interim relief, saying my dismissal is yet to be approved by the court, therefore give interim relief, he could have got it. But they said no, the shift cannot take place. There's an interesting judgment on that. Then very many times you will find the labor court grants a relief of reinstatement with back wages. What is the reinstatement? The courts have clarified. Reinstatement means always you go back to the original post. At the time of termination was an operative. Even after 10 years, you will become only an operative. Because 10 years elapsed, you will not become a foreman or a chargeman or go to the next grade per se by an eclipse of time. You will go back to the same position. Actually, they said it is status quo ante. Then this is a 20th one is a well settled principle. Ex parte order, as you all know in any civil proceedings, etc., should also be based on appreciation of evidence. Ex parte evidence cannot simply say WW1 examine, claim proved, reinstated, or workman not present, MW1 examine, claim held to be not proved, therefore ID is dismissed. There should be an application of mind, there must be prima facie evidence. The next one is, I said 11 capital B. These are all the development on law. They said if there is a settlement which is not complete with, an execution petition can be filed. That's what the unreported judgment I have given. But if a case of relief of reinstatement, what is the quantum is not there, then you cannot file an execution petition straight away. You have to file a, as I said, 33C2 petition. You are having an entitlement, but you should compute it. Even after it not computed, then you can file an execution petition 11B. Therefore, the distinction is if there is a settlement which is already says rupees price, there is no need for 33C2 again. EP can be filed. But if money is not quantified, then EP cannot be filed. To quantify the money, you have to go back to 33C2. That's the distinction in those terms. There are two other principles which I want to keep you informed. One is abandonment of service. In labor law, you will come across this plea, not nowadays, earlier. When an employee does not turn up for work for quite some time, the management, instead of holding him guilty of absenteeism, raise a plea of abandonment. That is, he is abandoned the job. When he goes for employment, after some time, they say you are abandoned. Therefore, the plea taken before the labor court is, I am not terminated. There is no act of termination. He himself is abandoned. But the Supreme Court has clarified an abandonment plea cannot be raised in a very simplistic way. There should be enough material to show that he deserted the job. So the period of time is very necessary. A person does not report for work. You convey a message to him, kindly report for work, you are absenting from work. It does not turn up at all. Then probably you can raise a plea of abandonment. But after sometimes he reports for work and raises a dispute for his very non-employment, you cannot raise a plea of abandonment because he wants employment. That is the principle. Then next is loss of lien employment. Even now, some old standing orders contain this clause. It says if a person does not report for work for 10 consecutive working days, he loses his lien on employment. That is no termination by the management, but he loses his right over employment. This is some clauses are there. But Supreme Court said, even when you do that, you must abide by the principles of natural justice. You must read principles of natural justice into this legal provision. And even if you want to apply the standing orders, you should say you are not reporting for work for the past 10 days. You are lost your lien of employment. Kindly explain why we cannot take such a plea. Probably the workman can come back and say, I was unwell, my parents didn't know what to do, that's why they could not be communicated, or I was caught in a web of criminal case, I was arrested, no, I'm ready. So they said there is no question of loss of lien on employment merely because absent for a few days in terms of the standing orders. Still they say no, you must apply the principles, call for his explanation, etc. Then plea of victimization. Victimization is a monster. But in the first judgment, Supreme Court says uh, victimization, though may be a monster, but it must be pleaded and proved. There may not be a direct evidence, but there should be circumstantial evidence. It must be pleaded and proved. In second judgment, Supreme Court clarifies it in a better manner, saying the punishment is so unjust, it shocks anybody's conscience. Plea of victimization is writ large on the face of it. There need not be further proof on that. You read both the judgments, they'll be very interesting judgments to read, especially Bharata and Moods, how they treat the plea of victimization. Williamson Mager, no doubt a short judgment, it's very crisp but to the point. The next judgment is a certain methodology of functioning of the labor courts. In labor courts those days, whenever a dispute is raised, maybe frivolously, number of preliminary objections used to be raised, saying there's no valid industrial dispute, that we are not an industry, that this person is not a workman in the definition, etc. And they will tell the court it's a jurisdictional matter, therefore it must be decided in the first instance. Earlier it was taken up. So if the amendment loses the case on preliminary issue, then they will move the High Court, then they will go up. Until then, the issue will be pending before the Labor Court with no relief to the workman. Then every plea is rejected, again come back to the Labor Court, raise a non-employment issue on merits. The Supreme Court clarified this type of preliminary issues in labor matters should be discouraged, and they cautioned the labor courts. The court should pose a question itself whether it is desirable to issue these points, and therefore there is a implicit uh, bar against the labor court from deciding preliminary issues on merits of the case, saying you're not a workman, not an industrial dispute, not an industry, etc., etc. But the exception is whenever the domestic inquiry is conducted, since in Firestone I referred to the very beginning, 73 LIC, the Supreme Court has said if the inquiry is vitiated, the labor court should give opportunity to the workman to prove the inquiry merits again. In Cooper Engineering case, the Supreme Court has clarified that judgment holds good whenever there is a domestic inquiry and it is attacked, and the amendment pleads that it is a valid inquiry, and if the inquiry is held to be not is inquiry held to be vitiated, given opportunity, it is mandatory on the part of the labor court to decide whether the inquiry is conducted in a fair and proper manner as a preliminary issue and give a decision thereof. Only thereafter he can. If the inquiry is vitiated, the amendment asks for an opportunity, give the opportunity. If the amendment does not give an opportunity, ask for opportunity, then proceed further on what is the relief of reinstatement should be given. Therefore, there is a two-stage trial in a labor court. First is on the preliminary issue. Evidence may take place or evidence may not be taken place. There must be a preliminary decision only on these aspects, not on other aspects. Then on the final award. Now, the caution is if a preliminary decision is given by the management, that cannot be challenged by the labor management before a high court. This is again a caution in Cooper Engineering. They said that the high court should discourage from filing it, and they cannot come to the high court at a threshold stage on preliminary issue because they are already given an opportunity. If they are so well advised, even after the final award goes against them, they can challenge the preliminary order as well as the final award before the labor court wholesomely and not in a peaceful manner. Then how a dispute under section 2K to be raised? I said in the beginning, a union should be formed. That union should have the backing of the workforce, and that workforce should convene a general body meeting. The general body meeting, the workmen should sign the proceedings. They should authorize the union leader to raise the disputes A, B, C, D. and give a mandate to the union to negotiate and arrive at a settlement, etc., etc. That process is well said in this Madura Mill judgment. They refer to earlier judgments also because there's not much of a law later on. I refer to this. It's a classic judgment which deals with the 1950 judgments onwards, how to dispute should be raised. Then the next thing is the labor codes grant a relief of reinstatement and back wages. Earlier, in terms of Hindustan Tin case, they said once award is granted, setting aside the punishment, the back wages is automatic, unless there are compelling circumstances. Therefore, they said virtually reinstatement means with back wages only. But in mid 2000 onwards, the trend changed, and the Supreme Court has said it is not automatic. As I said, even under 11A, the Labor Court has got a power to grant relief with back wages, without back wages, 25% back wages, etc. Therefore, they said the court should apply the mind as to whether back wages is given or not. The labor court should apply the principles whether during this period he could have been employed elsewhere or the company has become financially bad, whether he is scope for relief of reinstatement, etc. And the first is what they say, the Supreme Court said golden means. Actually, they said an average, just strike an average 50-50, etc. Then the next statement, a host of factors, not only on 11A, but in a case of simple termination, a casual employee terminated, temporary employee terminated, or an employee who worked for less years. The non-employment litigation is for long years. What is the type of misconduct committed by him? Is it a severe one or a petty offense? So they said you should take consideration host of factors and then mold the relief of back wages. Neither automatic nor no, but it should be considering host of factors. Whether the workman is in a position to get employment, whether he has got into the box, or the management has let in evidence to show he is employed elsewhere. Consider all those aspects. Next, the 2020 again, this is Chandrachud has said, gone back to the Hindustan Tin and said, it's automatic. Unless the management proves the contrary, why should the labor court deny back wages to the workman? And then in the latest in January part, he said it is automatic. So I just see the swing here and there. That's why I said you must read the journals very thoroughly and studiously in labor law. That one vexed question in labor jurisprudence was this famous Uma Devi case. Uma Devi case, as you all know, is in service law, which deals with irregular appointment, illegal appointment. Whereas irregular appointment can be regularized, but not the illegal appointments. In a way, these issues come before the labor court also. In respect of issues not before the high court, because this company is not an institution coming within Article 12 of the Constitution of India, and registry is not available. Like State Transport Corporation, it's concurrent jurisdiction, but they come to the labor court. Or a private limited company or a public limited company, they come to the labor court. Whether the principles of Uma Devi case, illegal appointment, irregular appointment should be considered or not, is again a matter of controversy. The first judgment in Maharashtra State Transport Corporation, it is under the Maharashtra Act. There is an act called MRTU and Maharashtra Recognition of Trade Union and Prevention of Unfair Labor Practice Act. There, when a complaint is filed on unfair labor practice in respect of irregular appointments, the court said you cannot imply the principles of Uma Devi there because it's a separate enactment. The next is UP Power. They said yes, the principles can be applied. The labor court can invoke the provisions of the, principles of Uma Devi. Then again in Haryana warehouse, the Supreme Court said no. As far as the law, industrial jurisprudence is concerned, it will go strictly in accordance with the industrial law, and the principles of Uma Devi case may not be applied. Now, in 2020, again, Justice Chandrachud says there is a different benches of the same strength giving different views. Therefore, in 2020, he has said this should go before larger bench. This sort of illegal, irregular, how the labor court should look into it. It should be referred to a larger bench. That's where we have gone. Next issue is the cause of action. Earlier, we all thought the termination order will be only in a place where the non-employment takes place or where he was last employed. Now, Supreme Court has clarified, not necessarily, it can be in dual place. In this case, he was transferred from Aurangabad to Puducherry. He did not even report for work. Puducherry factory was closed. Puducherry factory termination order emanated from there. But still, they said he can raise a dispute in Aurangabad. It's a big shift in favor of the workman, I should say. Then next is very important, writ jurisdiction. Kindly read 1981 LLJ 137 Gujarat Steel in full. It's a classic judgment on the issues regarding how an arbitration award should be complied with, how a strike should be looked into, how an active strikers and passive strikers should be looked into, how a large number of employees cannot be dismissed from service because they are going on a strike, and how the High Court can mold the relief or Supreme Court can mold the relief as if it is functioning as a labor court. It is not taking the dispute straight away, but the dispute has gone through a judicial process in terms of the provisions of the ID Act, but put an end to the litigation. The Supreme Court or High Court can give complete justice by putting a finality. In other words, in a simple way, it need not remand it everywhere. Okay, this action of the labor court is wrong. Okay, we will send back the matter to the labor court to decide on these lines. But the court can say if the materials are before us, that too concerning large number of workmen, there need not be another round of litigation. This is what the importance of Gujarat Steel Tubes, though it deals with the strike being a misconduct, etc., etc. But its multivarious issues are resolved. I have taken it only for the purpose of writ jurisdiction. They said we can do it by ourselves. Second is also on the same principle that under Order 41, Rule 22 or 33 CPC, a party can invoke the provisions of those principles and still try to uphold the award even on points which held against. This is what the Madras High Court and Supreme Court has also said. So this is another principle. So therefore, I have broadly taken you to about 31 principles. Okay, there are four jurisdictions, 2A, 2K, 33, 33C2, generally before courts. There are non-employments and larger non-employment, apart from non-employment, economic demands, money dues, etc. Now, in respect of those cases, what is the principle? How a 33 jurisdiction can be fit into, how a non-employment can be fit into, what is the jurisdiction of the labor court, what are the principles to be adopted in labor jurisprudence is what I said in the second part of the uh, uh, preparation I have made. With this, I come to an end. So I have gone to extent in depth to give you a fair idea how the labor code functions and what is the labor jurisprudence. And if you have a firm grip on these principles and make an attempt to read the journals subsequently, I'm sure you should be a successful lawyer in practicing in labor laws. With this, I complete my speech.